Hi, everyone, and welcome to Lessons in Leadership, a brand new podcast brought to you by MLK Search with a mission to drive more knowledge and awareness around leadership into the education sector. I'm Steve Lyons, and today we're going to be hearing about our guest's background and journey into school leadership, his thoughts on the current landscape of leadership recruitment, and gathering some top tips for would-be leaders. As this is our first episode, we wanted to speak with someone with vast experience of leadership who's not only an inspiration to young people, but is well regarded for sharing his extensive knowledge with his peers. So I'm really excited to have him here. So who is this guest? Our guest today is Jon Tait. Jon is Deputy CEO and Director of School Improvement at the Arete Learning Trust in North Yorkshire. Prior to this, Jon worked in 3 very diverse schools across the North East for nearly 20 years, 15 of those in various senior leadership positions, and has successfully completed both his NPQH and NPQ-EL leadership qualifications. Jon's also an education author and speaker, having now released 4 books ranging from classroom pedagogy to school leadership, and has even delivered a talk on the world-famous TED stage. Aside from education, Jon's been heavily involved in the sporting world, having played in the FA Cup as a semi-professional footballer, coached American football for Great Britain, and was recognised for his continued work with young people by carrying the Olympic torch in the build-up to the London 2012 Olympic Games. What an introduction and what a guest to have on. Welcome to the show, Jon, and thank you for being our very first leader to join us on the podcast.
Thanks, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here, and kind of feeling quite either embarrassed or kind of, a little bit kind of rosy-cheeked at that kind of introduction. So yeah, thank you very much indeed for kind of giving my life story kind of back to me.
No, the pleasure's certainly all ours. That we'd sort of been connected on LinkedIn, I think, for a few years, and I'd sort of seen a lot of your content, Jon. So I was like, I need to get Jon. If we're going to do a podcast, I need to get Jon Tait on this because he's got a lot to say and it's all really valuable stuff. So it's going to be really useful for our listeners as we go forward. So if we can really start at the beginning, really, Jon, and if you could tell us a bit about your background, where you grew up, and initially why you decided to get into teaching as a profession, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from the northeast of England, just from born in Darlington, I tell a lot of kids that I actually wasn't the smartest kid in school, and I was pretty much a C grade student at school. That was kind of what I was. Went to kind of college, didn't do kind of very well at college because I was, unfortunately at the time, my parents had split up around about year 11 time. So I was kind of living in between kind of mum and dad's and playing five-a-side probably 3 or 4 nights a week and, using college as a social kind of hangout more than anything else. And it's interesting, I dedicated my first book to my mum, because actually what my mum did is that when I came home from college on results day, I didn't do very well, and I was like, I'm not sure what I'm going to do, probably just going to resit, not sure what's going to happen. And I remember vividly her, and I kind of wrote this in the acknowledgements, that she'd watched the news that night and had seen lots of students being interviewed on the telly who hadn't done very well, but had said, but I only need a D to get in here, or I only need a D and an E to get into here. And she went, well, hang on a second. Like, if these kids can kind of get out and get to university, why can't kind of my son? And ultimately, kind of over the next few days and weeks, really completely shaped my life by getting me in the car, taking me around places, telling me what clearing was, all this kind of stuff that I hadn't really thought of or heard of. And ultimately put me and set me sail that day on an incredible kind of life journey, which if that hadn't happened that day, or she wasn't watching the news that day, one of those kind of, I suppose, sliding doors moments, where you think that day I know has changed me and has shaped me. So I'll be forever kind of grateful for that. So went to university, didn't do teaching. I did kind of a sports science and business management degree. Came out of university, still didn't want to be a teacher. Not that I didn't want to be, but I hadn't really thought about it really. Wanted to become a sports coach, went out to America twice, did some coaching, came back, was a sports coach, did some lifeguarding, all that kind of stuff. And then started to think, well, what's the difference between a football coach and a PE teacher? Because I was trying to get a mortgage at the time with my now wife. And it wasn't very attractive to a bank manager to say, well, what do you earn a month? Well, depends how many kids come to the sessions. And if it rains that week and not many kids come, I'm not making that much money. It's not kind of what the bank manager wants to hear. So decided to go into PE teaching, got a call to do a graduate teacher program on my birthday, which was 29th of August. So I'm a baby in the year. Now, bearing in mind, if you think, and the reason I've said that is that we all know school starts in September. So I got a call on my birthday on the 29th of August at like 9 o'clock in the morning. So I thought it was my mum ringing. And his answer, hi, is that John? Yeah. We've got you a place. And I was like, wow, when do I start? And they're like, Monday. I was like, what? So it all just changed very, very quickly. did my graduate teacher program, did my NQT in PE, and then that was it. I've kind of been a teacher and a leader longer than I've been a teacher, I suppose now. But yeah, that's kind of how I got into teaching, and then through my kind of passion within teaching, I became an assistant head of year very quickly, then a head of year, and then an assistant head teacher, deputy head teacher, and now a deputy CEO and director of school improvement. And yeah, that's kind of that's the journey I took. And I remember as well vividly how, again, another acknowledgement I've made in one of my books, my head of year book, was that I was asked to go in to see the assistant head teacher one day when I was a normal classroom teacher, and she said, "John, have you seen the advert for the assistant head of year job on the staff room wall?" And I remember saying to her, yeah, I've seen that, Kath, but why would I want to pick up everyone else's crap all day long? And then that's all I did for the next 10 years of my career was kind of, so I thought I didn't want to do it, thought I only wanted to come into teaching to teach PE, but actually I've now been a leader for longer than I've been just a classroom teacher. So yeah, it's been an amazing journey, and one that I've thoroughly enjoyed, and really thankful back to that day when my mum kind of stopped me and said, you can do this, and let's do it. So yeah, that's kind of what I've done.
Wow. Would you say having that from your mum and giving you that sort of self-confidence that you could do that, do you think that pushed you into leadership, Jon? Because obviously you said you weren't thinking about that. You almost just went into leadership on the guise of someone else asking if you'd seen the post. So do you think that comes from something?
I don't know. I mean, it might do potentially. And she was a really kind of strong woman. And unfortunately, we kind of lost her a year and a half ago to motor neuron disease. And she demonstrated that strength of character all the way through that time, and really put that kind of brave face on. So maybe that's kind of coming through from that point of view. I think more so it becomes that, I've never ever sat. I never went. I know some people that go into teaching and say, I want to be a head teacher. Like they see that and they want to do it, whether they know what the job is or not. That's kind of quite different. But I never ever really looked up and said, I want to be a head of year, or I want to be an assistant teacher, I want to be a deputy, I want to be a head. I never really kind of had that. But the longer you're in a role, and the better you become at it, you start to see the people that are above you in those positions, and you start to either think, I could do that and I'm like that, or they're not very good, I could do that better than them. And you almost get to that stage where you think, yeah, I can definitely do this. And I think some people are itching for promotion, you're itching to do more, you've got more to give, you feel you've got more to give. Now, whether that's like a natural calling inside you, or whether that's just actually you feel you've got more to give. But I've always not wanted to be comfortable, and I moved on from my last job as deputy head teacher because I felt that I was slipping into a little bit of doing the job with my eyes closed, and kind of I needed a new challenge and I wanted to push myself again. So I think that's probably been there. Whether that's come from kind of my mum, then maybe. So yeah, it's everyone's different, I suppose, is the narrative there. But yeah, it's been a great ride.
And would you say, because I was quite interested to see that you'd coached the American football team for Great Britain, which is a huge thing, and they say the best leaders are coaches a lot of the time. So do you think that set you up quite well for leadership?
100%. Yeah. I always. I have a hashtag that I use quite a lot, either on my own Facebook or on my kind of professional networks on Twitter and Facebook and in LinkedIn. Hashtag attention to detail, and that I believe that has come through from my coaching. That actually, if anyone knows American football, it's all about strategy, it's all about planning, it's all set plays. So if you don't know much about it, it's like, imagine a corner or a free kick in football, and planning exactly where people are going to run, who's going to run out of a space to create a space for someone else to run into. It's all that. It's all strategy. And every time the ball moves in American football, it's a pre-designed kind of play. So it's all about strategy, and that complete attention to detail, from planning everything to understanding how things work, and that kind of attention to pursuing excellence absolutely has made me a better leader. And there are so many things that I've brought into my kind of leadership from being an American football coach, and from being the head of like that kind of organization, to planning all those details and working with people and getting the best out of them, and ultimately understanding that every player is different and you've got to treat them differently. And some people need music to get motivated. Some people need quiet. Some people need shouting at. Some people need, grabbing and kind of, come on, let's go, and all that type of. But actually, that doesn't work for everyone. And I think understanding that as a staff body as well, that actually everyone is going to be different, and that there isn't a one size fits all for how you're going to motivate people, I think has been really useful. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of transferable skills, I suppose, between that environment and taking that into teaching. In regards to leadership, John, when you first got into those sorts of roles, what were your major learning curves initially and obstacles when you got into that?
I think there was probably one or two that stick out, and hopefully people can kind of, if you're listening to this and think, well, I want to be a leader, or I'm coaching leaders and I want to kind of pass this knowledge on. I think the first thing, and this is irrespective of whether we're in education or whether we're just in any organization in the world, that actually the best teachers don't always make the best leaders.
Mm.
And I could say that for the best postman or the best policeman or the best nurses or whatever it is. And it's very strange that the better you get at something when you progress in your career, the more you move away from what you're actually good at. So I became, I think, a leader because I was, I believe, a really good teacher.
Mm.
I don't teach anymore. And it's like, it's quite, isn't it? And the best policemen, come off the streets and do more kind of, it's all those type of things that actually you because you become great on the front line, our professional systems then move you away from the front line and what you're great at. So the big learning curve was that actually there's a very different skill set. And a skill set as a leader is very different because it's not about marking books anymore or planning a lesson, or it's actually lots of other things on how you're going to get lots of other people moving in the right direction and motivate people and kind of create alignment and consistency across a school, and all those types of things, which actually you don't need to do as a teacher because you've got one class at a time. So that was the first thing, that actually great teachers don't necessarily make great leaders, and I had to learn new skills that that I'd not been taught, because none of our teacher training courses still, even now, train you as a leader, because they're training you as a classroom teacher. So that's the first thing. You're not trained to be a leader, and you only then learn those skills sometimes when you are given the task to do for the first time. For example, I had to take a couple of people through capability in my last job. Now, you're not trained for that, and suddenly someone says to you, "What, have you not done this before?" And you go, "Well, of course I haven't," because you don't do that as an assistant head or a head of you. You only do it when you get to a certain level. So sometimes things only happen to you and you only get experience of them at a certain level. So there is no training or experience, or where do I call this from in page 18 of my teacher training manual? Well, it's not there because so different skills are required for leaders than they are for people on the ground. And so that was one thing to learn. And then secondly, I think as well, a lot of people find is that if you become a leader in an organization that you've already worked in for a period of time, which I did, you then have to lead friends and colleagues that you've worked with very, very closely, some of which are very, very close friends. And suddenly you are then propelled into a position where you've then got to line manage those people, and finding out how to do that, because you hear people say, "Oh, you shouldn't then sit with them at dinner anymore, at lunchtime anymore, and you shouldn't sit next to them in the staff room anymore." And it's trying to find your own way of doing that without becoming the kind of, "Oh, you're now one of them." And it's how do you bridge that gap, because you need to be careful, because you can't sometimes be involved in the same banter or jokes about, because actually you're in a different position. So learning that in my own way, I think was an interesting development, and one that I had to find out my own, because there's no set way of doing that, because every context is different in every school. And I'm sure people listening to this will have been through that and thought, did I do that right? Did I do that wrong? How did it work? And sometimes you end up losing a few friends along the way, because people say, "Oh, well, why can't you do this anymore?" Well, I'm in a different position now, and I have a different kind of level of responsibility. So yeah, I think that was tough, but it's made easier if you become a leader in a new school.
Yeah.
Because you haven't had that pre-existing kind of relationships with people. You go in as a leader, whereas for me, I was then suddenly having to lead and line manage PE colleagues that I'd been, sitting and laughing and joking with, et cetera, for years, and then suddenly now, okay, I'm now in a different position. So yeah, I think that was quite difficult.
Yeah, it sounds quite hard to navigate that. And is there a period of time, would you say, John, from you take on that role, you have that initial friction, let's say, because suddenly now your behaviour is changing a little bit within that role. Is there a period of time that generally sorts itself out? I know you mentioned there that some people, you lose some friendships along the way, but is there generally a period of time where you've got through that and you're sort of at harmony with the role and those relationships?
Yeah, well, I think it's probably going to be different for everyone again, because it sometimes doesn't just rely on you and what you've done. It also relies on their
Mm,
mindset.
mm,
Like if one of those people who you had been working with still wants to kind of like, give you some grief about it, or like they have to be at peace with it as well, and they have to understand. And sometimes that's about talking to them and saying, listen, this is where I'm now, so therefore I'm not going to be able to. And having that kind of dialogue with people. And I think the quicker you can do that, then the more you can kind of move on past that. Um, sometimes sometimes I think it's difficult when you try not to do it and you try to still be their mate. Then it becomes very difficult. I think it's just a
mm.
case of hitting it head on and saying this is the way it is now, and that's it. So I think it'll be different for everyone. And sometimes breaks in term help that, like over a summer or over a Christmas period, where there's
Yeah,
a natural kind of break. So I think it's going to be different for everyone.
yeah, of course. So tell me more about getting into writing your books then, John, because obviously you'd picked up some skills as a teacher and then you got into leadership as well. When did you first start thinking of writing your books, and why did you actually decide to do that?
It's interesting. I went to a conference in Durham, and there was a guy speaking who was talking about Twitter, and I just used Twitter previously for kind of sports news and
Yeah.
following that kind of stuff, and a lot of people do initially, following famous people and kind of that kind of thing. And suddenly, my eyes were open to a different world and how Twitter can be used for educational purposes and sharing ideas and classroom blogs, and it was. I suddenly kind of had this kind of thought that, initially when I came into teaching, that people who had a voice in an expert voice in teaching were professors and people that kind of had written huge amount of books and thousands of pages and reports and things I didn't really understand.
Mm.
Suddenly, the internet had created an explosion where I could start a free blog from home tonight and write something about what I'm doing in my classroom and what works, and I can share it on Twitter, and it can be picked up by a teacher in Australia, America, Africa, wherever, and they can start to use it to help their kids in their classroom. And it was like, wow, like
Yeah.
this is crazy. So I kind of started following people, plucked up the courage to start, to create my own blog, create one for free, and just started writing about what was working in my classroom. And I went to a few teacher meets, and people who listen to this might be familiar with teacher meets from a few years ago. And suddenly, it was the idea that the regular classroom teacher can stand up at a teach meet and talk and present or write a blog and suddenly become a superhero of teaching, and not in a superhero way in terms of wanting fame and fortune, but like be a hero to somebody else, because actually what you think is ordinary to you is amazing to somebody else. And that was where it really kind of hit home to me that actually I could write and I could help. And I remember the first time that somebody got back to me and said, I've used this idea, and it was somewhere ridiculous like America.
Yeah.
It's really helped my kids. And I was like, whoa, like from what I've written for free about what happens in Jon Tait's classroom has now been used in another country to help kids. And it was suddenly that like realization that the world doesn't have as many boundaries and borders as we think, and we can actually help each other quite easily in this kind of medium. So started doing that, um, generated kind of more and more people follow me on Twitter. I was blogging quite a bit and speaking at free conferences, teach mates and things, and just building that kind of my confidence to write, my confidence to speak. And it soon became, interestingly, it was almost at the time I was finishing coaching American football. And I still say now, because a lot of people say to me, do you, and people say this to people who stop playing professional football and things, do you miss that kind of buzz and the adrenaline buzz
Mm.
of kind of game day or, a game? And speaking at public speaking at conferences has now filled that kind of void for me, because
Yeah.
that's my kind of real, kind of buzz that I get. So I was writing, and then eventually my current publishers, Bloomsbury, contacted me and asked me if I wanted to write a kind of a review for a book, and I thought it was just going to be going on their website. Jon Tait said this book was quite good, yeah. And I wrote this, and then they sent me the book, and my name wasn't. It was on the back of the book. I was like, "Whoa, what's that? How cool is that? It's
Wow.
on the back of a book." And then I was like, "This is amazing." And they said, "Well, we've seen what you've been writing in your back catalogue. We love your writing style." And I thought, "What? I've got a writing style? Like where's that come from? From this C grade kid at school that
Mm.
suddenly has a writing style?" But again, it was because I'd written and written and written and honed that craft and practiced it and got better and better, or allegedly better and better. And I always used to think about what's my audience, who am I writing for? Well, I'm writing
Mm.
for me when I would have first started teaching, and what would I have wanted? And so that's kind of how I got to that point. And then they offered me a contract to write a book, or write 2 books actually to start with. So I wrote 2 books for them. And then I got to a point where I could then go back to them and say, I want to write another one now, and I've got an idea. Whereas to start with, they kind of came with the idea to me and kind of pitched it to me. Then I was then able to kind of sell. My last 2 books have more been kind of me saying, I want to do this, and I think we need to do this. And yeah, it's been amazing to kind of then have people randomly tweet me, email me, speak to me at conferences and say, oh, I love your book. I've used it. I wrote one for Heads of You, and I've had a lot of people write to me and put reviews on Amazon saying they got the book, they read the book, and they got the job. And it's like, well, there we go. I mean, that's it. It's amazing. So yeah, I really like that kind of hearing that the end story of I've been able to help someone, because like I said to you before, I don't teach anymore. I still feel I'm a teacher, but I'm just teaching adults now. So I
Yeah.
still get that same buzz of when you first go into teaching and you help a student, with a mathematical equation, they get it right, and you get that warm glow and go, oh, I helped them. I still get that same feeling, but from helping adults and helping teachers and helping leaders, just in different ways.
Wow, that's amazing. It's a great point just around technology there, about how you can just, influence other people globally around just through content that you're putting out. And do you think that's changing the way education works, would you say, John?
I think so, because I think that there's now far more people, like millions more people, that are now able to share their expertise and their voice and their experience. Even when they're just a classroom teacher, you don't need to be a professor of a university, or have gone to Harvard or Yale or Cambridge or Oxford to be putting reports out. Actually, now what you get mostly now, and what I've seen, that the huge change and shift in this, is that the most popular kind of blogs and articles and books and things are for people who are on the ground still doing it, which is what we want. We don't want someone telling us how to teach who hasn't taught for 20, 30 years. We want people who've taught this afternoon and taught kids and then can tell us how it worked or how it didn't work. So there's been a huge shift to that, and I think it's become a lot more authentic and a lot more real from people who are currently doing it, and I think the book market of kind of educators has exploded, and that's what we've needed. We've needed to kind of let people kind of who are still teaching, share their ideas and get them out there with people. Now, whether that's a blog, whether it's a book, whether it's a YouTube video, it doesn't matter. The medium of getting that story out there is definitely there.
Yeah, it almost feels like there's more of a community, a wider community now of sort of education professionals that can just link in with each other. If you look on LinkedIn, for example, you've got the groups there, head teacher groups and senior leadership groups and everything on there. It just feels like there's a much wider community of people that can share practice and experience.
Yeah, completely. And
yeah.
I found that to be a fantastic global staff room of people who want to share and speak to each other, challenge and support. And one advice, whatever advice I'd give for people, if you are on things like LinkedIn, Twitter, etc., don't fall into the trap of removing people or blocking people or not following people who you don't agree with, because there's a danger that if you only follow or connect with people who you agree with, who are like-minded and have the same thoughts, you can potentially just live in an echo chamber. And what you need is a regular dose of, really, I'm not sure if that's right, because it gets you to think, and if everyone who you just agrees with you all the time, you're not challenging, and you're not really extending your own mindset or the capacity to think about different ideas. So it's always really important to not push those people away, because you need that as like an acid test in terms of check and balance, and actually, is that right? What do I think? And do I really think that? And then you go and think about it and process it, and then you go, I still don't agree with it, or oh, that's interesting now. But you've had the time to process it and think about it. Otherwise, you potentially fall into a habit of believing your own hype and kind of just thinking one way of all the time. So I think it's important to not to push those people away, because they act as a real kind of sense check as well.
Yeah, of course. And just in regard to sort of, you talk about individuals using social media and technology and sharing content. Do you think schools do that now? Is it a thing that multi-academy trusts are moving into in terms of using social media technology to sort of almost become a brand? Because as we know, the agenda is for generally all schools to be in a multi-academy trust by 2030, I think it is. So do you think that's been utilised as well as it could be in regard to that wider network for multi-academy trusts and schools?
Yeah, I think schools are using it really, really well to reach out to parents on things like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc., and to be sharing those kind of regular news articles. Because let's face it, we all thought that, maybe 10, 20 years ago, that websites were the kind of future. Websites now, it's interesting that you have to consciously go to a website, right? So yes, a school can put loads of stories on their website, but that means that parents have to think, oh, I'll just check what's on the school website. Well, how many people are kind of doing that now, unless they're going there for a specific reason? But with social media, you just kind of scroll through things and things hit you like subconsciously because you're not looking for it, but it hits your timeline. So that's been a huge advance and a free way to really, really kind of market, publish the great things that are happening in schools. And that's becoming a kind of a job in itself almost to get regular, hourly or kind of, on the hour kind of content out all the time. And then there's lots of kind of tools that people may be aware of. And if you're not, you need to look into this because it's not that new anymore, of scheduling your social media posts. So using social media scheduling tools where you can link Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook together. So you only have to post once and it fires it out into kind of three mediums. Again, if you're using Instagram, it has to have a picture with it, but you might want to use that anyway because a picture is more engaging than just a bit of text anyway on Facebook and Twitter. And also thinking about the times that you want to schedule those things to go out. So whether it's, I always used to make sure it was mid-morning or, kind of like, from a mid-morning coffee point of view, lunchtime, early evening, those times where, internet traffic and social media traffic is going to be higher. The last thing you want to do is put 4 posts out on Monday morning at 9 o'clock because it's on your to-do list and expect parents to then look at it and remember to speak to their kids about it at 5 o'clock at night. Like it's not happening.
Yeah.
So just because you want to put it out then, or because it suits you, doesn't work like that. You've got to make sure you're scheduling it at the right times and be strategic about when you drop those things out. So things like that, I think, are second nature to a lot of people now. But if they're not, then you need to be looking into that because if you're not, other people are, and you're behind the curve.
And it's funny because obviously from my side of the screen, where we're a recruitment agency for executive leaders, and we deal with a lot of technology, I suppose, within the recruitment sector. Is that being utilised by schools and multi-academy trusts? Could they be doing more in regards to that? Because I know you mentioned sort of news, blogs, contacts with parents. Do yourself as a trust, or do you know of other trusts that fully utilise that tool of the internet and social media to really push on recruitment? Because obviously you can reach a lot more people now rather than the traditional ways of maybe putting something in the test and putting something on the local authority and your own website.
I think that's an area that needs to be developed further. I think lots of people are doing that, and I think lots of people are using it as well as some of those traditional methods. Because unfortunately, and I say this because of financial reasons, like the test is still one of those number one places people might look at, but it's really expensive.
Yeah.
And actually, it's how do we look at kind of other methods around that? But I also think there's a not I was going to say a trick there. It's not a trick because that would suggest it's a gimmick. There's also to think about how do you market yourself as an organization, because when you go out for a job, you put a job out, it's not just the fact that you're interviewing the candidates. The candidates are also interviewing you, because if you're going out for a job and actually, there's not a lot of people in the kind of talent pool, let's say, or people looking, then if there's 3 jobs wanting, or 3 people wanting a head teacher or deputy head, assistant head, maths teacher, business studies teacher, whatever it is at any level, why would they pick you rather than the other one that's got the advert out? Now, sometimes, and a few years ago, it used to be, well, we've got a new building, therefore they'll come to us. Lots of schools have got new buildings now, so that's not necessarily the kind of selling point anymore. So why would they want to come to you? So I think that's where you can utilize social media and the internet to actually create, like a mini site or a kind of a specific pack that, or I don't use the word pack because pack suggests it's the old crap photocopied sheets that go out to everyone, but actually your website, some people fall into the trap of thinking, well, it's on our website. They can come to our website and see what we're about. Your website isn't for the audience of potential teachers. Your website is generally for the audience of students, parents, and unfortunately, Ofsted. Okay.
Yeah.
So therefore, if I'm thinking about teaching at your school, what is on your website that's drawing me in? Yes, I can see all the wonderful things that your kids are doing, but actually, where is it? The case studies of the teachers who started as an NQT that are now in a leadership position. Where is it where you talk about workload and well-being and the different activities you're doing and the different leadership and professional learning kind of programs you've got? And sometimes you need a separate kind of vehicle to do that. So it's a specific website or place or mini site where you've got, because every school website that I've seen has a message from the head teacher. But that message from the head teacher is not to potential teachers, is it? It's to potential parents and kids. So you need a message from the head teacher about why work at our place. Why would you want? And I think that's where people really need to think outside the box in terms of how can we market ourselves as a school so that you want to work with us rather than the school down the road. And I think the acid test for that, for people to think about, is if there were two jobs for exactly the same position at your school and your competitor school, because everyone's got a school that they would suggest is one that would compete for students and staff. Why would they want to come and work at yours? Why would they pick yours? Why would they apply to you rather than the other one? Or if they got offered both jobs at the same time, why would they pick you? And if you can't answer that, or you can't answer it very well, then that's where you need to go back to the drawing board and think, well, what is it and who are we and what's our USP, I suppose, as a school.
Yeah, and we talked off air a week or so ago, didn't we, John, around sort of sourcing leadership for schools in the interview process. And obviously, you've been through that process yourself, as obviously both as a candidate, but also as somebody involved in that process. Could you talk us through the process, I suppose, of being a candidate? So when you've been for those leadership roles and describe to us what that process looks like and how it might be improved or how you've improved it in your current role now.
Yeah, I think that for lots of leadership positions, whether it's assistant head, deputy head and things, lots of schools now seem to go for things like 2-day interviews, and they are very, very stressful, intensive, and they're almost a survival of the fittest. And sometimes that's for a reason, because actually we cram lots of things in because we want to see what you're like under pressure, because that's what leadership's like. Leadership isn't, oh, I've got 2 hours, 3 hours to think about this. Leadership is sometimes you finish teaching 3 lessons on the bounce. You've got an inbox full of emails asking for this. Reception ring up and there's a parent kicking off in reception that wants to see you immediately. You haven't had your lunch. It's raining outside. So we need to almost try and replicate some of those environments in an interview. So you generally find that, in my experience, you've got, let's say, a 2-day interview where you've got day one full of activities on the hour every hour, sometimes on the half hour every half hour. I mean, my deputy head interview, I think I had about 12 or 13 tasks. I mean, over 2 days, it was really kind of intensive. And for people listening and saying, well, what would those tasks be? Things like an in-tray task, so you get you get a sheet saying, these things are in your inbox. You've come to your email in the morning, and it tests out your priorities. How do you prioritize? Can you spot the safeguarding one? What are you going to do first? What are you going to delegate? What do you not need to do? What needs to be done? What's the red herring? Then things like you might have to write a letter to parents so we can test your level of kind of, your written kind of English and what you'd like to communicate. You might take a phone call from an angry parent. So there might be a scenario where people are listening in and you've got a member of staff who's pretending to be a parent ranting on about something and you've got to deal with that. You might get some data to crunch. You might have a lesson to teach. They might give you an assembly to deliver. You might have panels, a student panel. You might have, I've been in interviews where we've done a panel for every area of the Ofsted framework where you're speaking to staff about safeguarding, about teaching and learning, about leadership, about behaviour and attendance. You might have a development plan to write based on the data you've crunched. All of these things, like, you don't get a lot of time with them. They're like half an hour. You walk out of one door, you take a breath, you walk into another door across the corridor and go, right, what's this panel? And they
that's
go,
intense.
We're here speaking about behaviour. And you're like, can I have a glass of water first? And, and then that's just getting through day one. Then sometimes they would make a cut. And on day two, there'd be some other tasks, or some of those tasks that I mentioned might be day two tasks that then lead into the final interview, which people would be more familiar with, the kind of sit around the table, 10 or 12 questions, formal interview kind of process. But all of that has gone beforehand, which has been scored every hour. People give, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 outstanding, 2 good kind of answers, 3 not really sure, or 4 not, we wouldn't appoint them. And all those scores are then generated, and then at the end of the day, you're looking at your scores, who's got the top scores, which 3 or 4 we're going to take through it the next day. So all of that, so it's very intensive, but it tests all areas of the job that you've applied for.
Yeah. When you talked about people being cut generally on the first day, I'm assuming, what is it? Is it the pressure that they can't handle? Is it just that they're maybe not the right fit, and you had maybe reservations beforehand when they first came in, and it's sort of that pressure situation confirms that maybe they weren't the right fit? Sort of, how do you come to that decision, John? Because that's quite
Well,
interesting.
I think it's generally, if you've got a lot of scenarios and tasks like I just mentioned there, then ultimately it's a point scoring exercise. So there's a scoring chart for the interview panels. You're scoring them. You're kind of going through things, and then at the end of the day, you're looking at the top 3 or 4, because you need to cut at some point to make things work and to be able to kind of have this, and you then start to look at the ones that you're going to get rid of, but who haven't done very well. And when I say not very well, then they may not have been able to answer some of the questions very well. Their lack of experience has maybe shone through, or some of their personalities and characteristics might have shone through that you don't like as a team. They might have come across very arrogant, or very haphazard and kind of laissez-faire, and interviewing people is also not just about what they say, but it's about what type of fit they're going to be for your team. And the type of person that you're looking for, and they might be too overpowering, they might be too quiet, all those type of things, and that can sometimes be hard to take for people, because they may be very experienced, but they just might not be the right person for that team or that school. And that doesn't mean to say they're not going to get their next job or they haven't done very well, but the type of person that school is missing, they might not be that type of character, and another school might be crying out for that character that they are. It's just wrong person, wrong time. So not to beat people, not to beat up with yourself about the fact that it might not be your turn or your time.
Yeah, and do you have a set criteria, John, in terms of, let's say you're recruiting for a senior leader in school, in regards to what makes a good leader? Do you sort of rank characteristics with people that are coming in, or do you do that throughout the process? Sort of, in your opinion, what do you think makes a good leader?
Well, I think it's a combination of things, because you've clearly got to have kind of expertise, and you've got to have knowledge, and you've got to be a kind of an expert in your kind of, if you're going to lead attendance, you know attendance inside out. If you're going to lead teach and learn, you need to be an expert in teach and learning. So there's no kind of substitute for kind of expertise. However, you can't just be an expert, and you can't just be a knowledge bank. This is about leading people. This is about kind of being a leader, and for that, I would say things like integrity, authenticity, being approachable, and also being dynamic, because things aren't always linear. And the great kind of quote that I've seen that I share every now and again on Twitter is about something about kind of leaders are like tea bags. You really see the quality of them when they're in hot water. and I think that for me is that, it's that kind of, it's not about what I know about teaching and learning. It's not about what I know about this. It's actually how I'm changing, and how I'm able to change and adapt to different situations. And when one member of staff says, well, I don't agree with you, I'm not going to do that. Well, what do I do? Where's this in the manual of leadership? Actually, it's how you can, and also how you win people over, how people want to work for you, because they respond to you, they like you, you motivate them. And so there's so many things in those characteristics. It's not just about being the most knowledgeable, because if that was the case, people would sit a test and you just take the top 10 out of the test. It's about all those other characteristics that you see coming through from those activities on the day. One of the things that we've done quite often in my previous school is we do and it's a horrible exercise, and it is where you give a group task, and you've got all the candidates in a room on a group task, and around the edge of the room are all the observers watching.
Wow.
And the task is literally something like, here's the data, or here's the problem, you need to solve it, and you've got like an hour to do it. And it's really interesting seeing which people take the lead naturally, which people are overpowered and kind of say, right, well, it's my way or the highway, we're going to do this, and they want to really demonstrate that they're a strong leader, but that people on the outside are going, oh, God, I couldn't work with that person, like, whoa, and then the people are excuse me, sit back and do nothing, or that, so it's really interesting to see those dynamics working in a room. And it's a very difficult exercise when you're doing it as a candidate, because you don't know whether to be forthright or not be forthright, or if someone's been really aggressive and kind of, my way or the highway, do you let them do that and sit back and think, right, well, you crack on, mate, because that ain't gonna, and it's really interesting, because you see a lot from that task, and it's a very difficult task, but it's a very enlightening task for people to watch.
Yeah, it sounds like a minefield if you were a candidate in there with all the choices in a very short amount of time as well. It sounds like a bit of a pressure sort of thing to be in there, really difficult. Okay, so in regards to you mentioned you had observers and the process that you touched on there over the 2 days. Is there anything from your experience, because I know most trusts, most schools will do it differently. There's no sort of consensus for how it should be done. I suppose it's similar in a lot of ways, but it sounds like it's almost very different in a lot of ways as well. And as you know yourself, some schools actually struggle to recruit and get people through the door for leadership positions. So, is there anything that you would change about the process or improve around that? Because obviously it differs from trust to trust, school to school, and whilst you can share practice and knowledge, some will naturally be better than others. So is there anything you would say that schools could do to improve that process of recruiting for leadership?
I think the one thing I would say, and without knowing what everyone does, I think the one question I would ask people to think about and consider if you're a leader or a head or an executive head or or anybody thinking about putting an interview or a process together is, how do you try and observe leadership characteristics in your interview process? Because ultimately that's what you're trying to gauge. It's not about knowledge, or just knowledge, should I say, because you need to know how people are going to work in those environments. And that's very difficult. So therefore, the traditional standalone interview is almost like it's too false, because lots of questions you can potentially learn answers for, and you can potentially think about what questions are going to come up. You might get lucky and you might speak to people who've been through interview process, and they kind of coach you through kind of certain answers. And equally, you can sit there and lie in an interview. Like, you can sit there and say, oh, I would do this, I would do that. Now, the panel have no idea whether you've done that before, whether you haven't done that before, or whether you will do that in the future. So it's all about the responses and the answers you give. But actually, being a leader is actually really about the characteristics and how you do that. I could write a book and say, here are all the ways that you deal with all of these things in leadership, but you could do it differently to me. And it's that kind of, it's the banana hammer. It's not what you do, it's the way you do it. Actually, that's what a leader is. There isn't a way, it's how you speak it, where you stand, how you approach people, all those, where you sit, all those things. And I would then just ask people, how can you design, and I haven't got an answer for this, by the way, how can you design the perfect, or as close to perfect as you can, the process that can start to demonstrate those characteristics? Hence why, going back to what you said a minute about kind of that pressure situation of doing lots of things on one day, you try and find out as many things as you can. The formal interview is almost the kind of icing on the cake at that point. You've probably got to a point where you're pretty certain on someone by then, because that's just kind of confirming certain things. And at that point, if you've got two candidates left at the formal interview stage, which is sometimes what happens, you probably should be in a position where your panel is probably saying, we would appoint either of these. We're now just going to see which one's the best at the answers they kind of give. You should have hopefully seen their characteristics before you get, because you ain't seen their characteristics in there, because you're seeing it's a bit of a false environment. So how you do that is very difficult. And yeah, that's kind of then open to everything from what capacity have you got to put this on, how much time and money do you want to spend on this process, how many people do and there's all those, because, and equally, you've got to be realistic. You can't say to someone, we need you for the whole week for interview, or have you on a residential for the half term to see whether you're any good. Like, you've got to be realistic and thinking, we've probably only got 2 days here maximum. But it's then thinking, well, I don't just want to cram things in for the sake of it. It's how do we what can it demonstrate about them as a leader and their characteristics?
Yeah, of course. That's really insightful. It's I mean, particularly for people that might be listening, thinking of, stepping up into those leadership positions as well, just getting a taste of what might happen in that situation, what the interviews are like as well. It's really helpful knowledge. We're coming up to an hour, John, so I wanted to get onto our 5 top tips for anyone that's either currently wanting to be a better leader or thinking about going into leadership. And we're going to ask this to each of our guests. So it'll be great. So when we get to the end of season 1 to see, what every different guest has said around this in terms of 5 top tips. So we were talking off air, and I think you've got some prepared anyway around that. But What would you say from your experience would be sort of 5 top tips for anyone that falls into that category?
Well, the first, like you said, I did a bit of prep on this to make sure I kind of had a good think of it this afternoon. I think the first one for me is, irrespective of whatever level you are, thinking about self-evaluating yourself against where you want to be. So if you're a middle leader and you want to be a senior leader, looking at the senior leader position, or if you might be a deputy head, want to be a head, whatever it is, looking at that position and thinking, what does it take and what do I need to be good at? And looking at all the different areas. Now, there is a good chance that you will have holes in quite a few areas, because for some people, you only get the experience when you're doing those roles. So there's a good chance there'll be a lot of holes. It's not then just kind of accepting, oh, well, I've got a few holes there. So what are you going to do about it? So the first thing is actually use the people around you who are experts in those areas to upskill you, because for every area you don't know about, there has to be someone in your school that's probably doing that. Otherwise, it's a huge gaping hole for your school, So if you're not that great on safeguarding, or you're not really sure on multi-agencies, or you've never led teaching and learning before, or you're unsure of how the attendance process works, seek out the person that's doing that and get them to upskill you and coach you on it, because there'll be someone in your school who can do that. So you don't need to go elsewhere and external. There's someone in your school that can do that. So that's the first thing. Self-evaluate and upskill yourself. Second thing then is what I call kind of get your shop in order. So if you're a teacher that prides yourself on kind of like great classroom, lessons and planning, make sure you've got all that absolutely licked, because when you become a leader, unfortunately, your teaching slides down your priority list and your leadership responsibilities become your priorities day by day, which means you need to be able to walk into your classroom 3 minutes late when someone's caught you on the corridor and said, John, have you just got 2 minutes? And you're like, oh, I want to be there for my kids when they're at the door. You can't always be there. So you need to make sure that all of your planning, all of your resources, everything is totally nailed on in your classroom, because your leadership will take your priority. Third is learning how to prioritize and organize. I was just saying to you off air earlier, Steve, that I've probably picked up, we had an Ofsted inspection this week, so I didn't do anything for 2 days apart from kind of walk the school. So I've picked up probably 20 or 30 jobs that I've had to put, and I have a digital to-do list on my phone. I have notes on my phone. Having that ability that I'm not going to then suddenly have to go back through loads of emails tomorrow, or forget things, or just not reply to people. Actually, I've got all those things. They're all in jobs. They're all dated. I know when they're going to be. I'm going to get through them tomorrow and Friday, tomorrow and Monday, and being really organised and making sure that nothing slips, because it can be quite easy. Because I remember when I first started coming into leadership, I was that guy that did one project at a time and I couldn't handle 2 projects. Now I've got about 55 on the go, and it's kind of how do you do that, and how do you keep organized? So definitely learn to do that. Fourthly, read and become an expert. And I think that we all want to be want to kind of be want to be an expert. Or we should want to be an expert. That actually we have that. I always say, and I think we talk about this off air as well, that kind of, we have a duty to all be experts, so that we can all bump into experts in our life. And if you like a certain food or a certain beer, and you kind of get served by someone and you say, oh, what's this like, or what's it taste like? You don't want someone just to go, oh, don't know, I just sell it. You want someone to, oh, you want to try this, or try that, or this is really good, or if you like this, you like this. And you come away thinking, oh, wow, it's great. I met someone that really knows their craft. So be that person, be an expert, and read up on, if you want to be an attendance lead, read up on attendance, read up on what it's about, read up on national statistics, read up on how to get people involved and what and the barriers. Just be that person and be the expert, because all the evidence is out there. We've talked before about the books that people are writing, and get involved and understand it, and make it your mission to be an expert on the things you don't know, or know even more about what you know, to start with. And then finally, lastly, watch other leaders in whatever genre. Take time to watch how leaders operate, and a fascinating one is watching politicians. Watch how they address people. Now, you need to detach and be mature about this, and detach what they're saying, because there's no point saying, well, I don't agree with them, I don't like them, I've never voted for him. It's not about what they're saying. Forget the message. How do they deliver it? How do they deliver that last punchy line, that real high impact line? How do they speak to people with gusto and authenticity? And and lots of people, I've said this in interviews before, and people have looked at me and gone, what's he talking about? But there's a question that we often ask in interview, and I've been asked it before. Tell me about a great leader, or tell me about a leader that's been great. And I've often referenced Hitler. And people are like, what's he going on about? But you talk to historians. He was probably the greatest public speaker. How on earth did he get and galvanize a whole country to believe and follow? So actually, again, forget the message and what it stands for. But in terms of the public speaking, and you look at historians, he was one of the greatest public speakers at that time. You look at someone like Obama and the difference between him and even the characteristics that Trump had. And how do you forget the message? But what are those things that we can learn from those leaders? Whether it's a football manager, whether it's a leader of an orchestra, whether it's look outside your normal genre, because when you look outside your normal genre, you then don't get caught up in, I'd do that differently, or I'd say that differently. When you're looking at someone different, and we did this in sport, it's great that you can watch like a basketball coach as an American football coach, because you then don't get into, I'd do that drill differently. You don't look at that. You look at what they're doing and how they do it and how they hold their body and how they give their their direction and their communication. So I would urge everyone to look at any leaders and learn from that. So they would be my 5 top tips for anyone at any level in terms of leadership.
Wow, that's some fantastic tips, Jon. They're really powerful. I would add on to point 4 about read is definitely having a look at your Step Into Leadership as well. Stepping Into Leadership book, that's definitely worth a read for people that are considering the move up. Jon, we've just come up to our time now, so I just want to thank you so much for actually coming in and being our first guest on this. It's, like I said, we've got a few people lined up for this, but I definitely wanted you as our first guest, just based on the content that you've put on. And I'm sure our listeners will be inspired by this and they'll have learned so much from what you've said in the past hour as well. It's really valuable stuff, not just for educational professionals, but also for people like myself as well that work in sort of the education recruitment industry too. I'm sure anyone that listens to that from that sector will learn quite a lot around recruitment within sort of leadership as well. So what we'll do following here, this will go up on our website. So our listeners definitely have a look at that. We'll put Jon's link on there for his website, which is www.edutait.com. So that's edutait.com. It's a really clever name. I was saying that off air, wasn't I, before? I love the fact that you've just got that in there. It's so sweet.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll put a link to that, and obviously a link to the literature as well. So anyone that's wanting to have a look at Jon's books, we'll put a link on there, because I think you can get them on Amazon as well, can't you, Jon? I know you.
That's right. They're all on Amazon, and you can either just search me, Jon Tait, on Amazon, and you'll find the books on there. There's a link on my Edutait site with all the books and a link to Amazon within there. If people are interested, and whether it's classroom pedagogy, whether it's becoming a head of year, whether it's stepping into senior leadership, or whether it's my Teaching Rebooted book, which is about educational research, whole range of stuff on there. If that's useful for you, then feel free. And I do lots of, as you know, Steve, lots of short 2-minute kind of videos on LinkedIn and Twitter about different kind of areas of teaching and learning. So if you want to connect with me on there, and if they're a kind of a weekly or a fortnightly inspiration for you to kind of think differently about things, then great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks, Jon. And finally, just to our listeners, thanks for listening to Lessons in Leadership. And if you like this podcast, don't forget to leave a review on our website, which is www.mlk-search.co.uk. Take a look at Jon's content. You won't regret it. And keep an eye out for our next episode that will be coming soon. So thank you again, Jon. It's been a real pleasure.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.